Hi, my name's Wendy from Sunflower Publishing, and this evening I've got a very special guest I am interviewing, talking to, chatting with over a glass of wine, Cussy. A lovely young author, I say young because she's younger than me, called Kimberly Sullivan. Now, I'm going to admit her because I can see her there waiting to jump in and talk to us. So I'm going to interview her and ask her loads and loads of questions, put her on the spot. And as minute she comes in and I can introduce you and, let me just hit the right button and tell you all about her. By the magic of science and technology, bear with me, any minute now, here she is. I hope. Kimberly, buonasera.
Buonasera. How nice to see you, Wendy. With a fire in the fireplace. You're in Abruzzo.
Where else but, next to my trusty Camino here. Well, it's so hot, sat next to the fire.
You can't say that because, for the rest of us who don't have a fireplace, it's so cold because they don't let us use our heating.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, how are you? Good?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. How are you?
Can I introduce you because you have a very impressive CV to date. So let me introduce you, and then obviously, we can just jump in and go straight from there. So you grew up in the suburbs of Boston. When you are back in the States, then New York is home for you. Fabulous. We watch it so much on the TV. I've never actually been there, but anyway, you studied political science and history at Cornell University and earned yourself an MBA. You've worked in journalism, you've worked for governments, and currently you work in Rome for international development. Good so far, huh? You are a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, the Historical Novel Society. You've written several short stories and 3 full novels, which are The Three Coins, Dark Blue Waves, and In the Shadow of the Apennines, which we will come on to and talk about that. You are married, you've got children, and you write, and I don't know how you find time to even cook anybody's supper, Kimberly, with all that.
And in Italy, that's important, don't you?
Exactly. So how do you fit all that in? Well, let's go back to the beginning then, shall we? Let's go back to growing up in the States.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's true. I grew up in Boston, but then I moved when we were about 12 to upstate New York,
Okay.
So Saratoga Springs. And then I've lived pretty much along the East Coast, mostly in the US. And yes, studied out in Western New York at Cornell for history and political science. And history works its way into many of my books. And of course, living in Italy, you're never far from interesting historical references. And I started off pretty much in government and in journalism, and worked at a very interesting time because the wall, I'm dating myself, but the wall came down when I was in college studying about the Cold War and following the events that went on. And I already had been many times to, I have a family in Germany and in Austria. So I used to go over to visit and was fascinated, of course, by, the fact that it wasn't very easy to travel into Czechoslovakia, into Hungary. And so when that happened, although I had been working in journalism and had planned to have a career working up through television stations in the US, I just couldn't let that pass. And so I lived for 3 years in what was then Czechoslovakia,
Wow.
and has since become Czech Republic, and started working there in journalism. And yes, no, so since then I've worked in mostly in international development for the last 25 years. So working with developing countries and working to improve their socioeconomic conditions, so with projects and everything. So that has been very nice. But yeah, I've been bitten by the Europe bug, I think. I love living in the States. I love returning to New York as a tourist, because when we go back, it's holiday and I don't have to worry about getting rush hour. I'm on vacation. It's wonderful. And Rome has been home for almost 23 years. I was 2 years in Milan for my master's.
What made you choose history to study at university? Was that something from your family background? Was that something that you were interested in at school? Why history?
Yeah, no, I double majored in history and political science. So I started working in government when I was in high school, actually. I started working on campaigns for we have local assemblymen for New York State. So I worked in the New York Assembly, which is like the Congress of New York. And then I started working with congressmen. I worked in the White House during college, and I worked as a mediator for the Attorney General's office for New York State. So I loved working in politics. I liked that a lot. And history, I was always fascinated by. So, and I came very close to having a triple major in art history, which was always something I loved, and of course goes wonderfully with history. And then, as you know, especially living in Italy, that's probably the area of study I use more, to be honest, because everything that I learned in school and studying all of these great artworks, I mean, I just love that about all the museums and all of the wonderful churches here and everything.
I mean, to work in Rome for many people would be an absolute dream, a beautiful thing to do, wonderful thing. But I guess living and working in Rome also comes with a few, maybe some disadvantages. How do you find that?
Well, with everything, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny because I say
New York, Rome.
They're completely different cities, and we laugh because I have a small apartment in New York City, and we go back for holidays. And for instance, my kids, particularly when they were younger, I have 2 sons, they loved New York and they absolutely adored it. And they said, why aren't we living here? Because they're half Italian, half American. And I said, yes, but you're here on holiday when it's idyllic. It's wonderful. Yes. You know, your parents aren't working. You don't have school. You don't have homework. You can play sports, be out all day. So Italy is really great for so many things. I think especially for a family environment, I think people are, as you know well, Italians are wonderful with kids, and kids growing up here, I think that they become very social. They're used to it's not just having the kids there, but it's speaking with the children, asking them about things. They're very used to that from an early age. Culturally, I love it here. I mean, I really think that it offers a lot. And the beautiful thing about Italy is traveling around, and every region is so different. I mean, that's true in a lot of European countries, but I think that in Italy and France, for me, those are the areas where you really see the difference of the food, and the difference of a lot of times the language, and the difference, the dialect that they speak, and the history, and that they really recognize themselves as being from that region. And so, yeah, there's so much here, and lots of inspiration for writing.
We have Abruzzo which we'll come on to, it's a very unique region, because for so many centuries it's just been a wild, remote, abandoned. And I think, I don't know, because of that, but if you talk to people in the village of Bisenti, where I am, and you say, how do you see yourself? I'm Abruzzese. What for me, that's so difficult to understand, because I'm British. It doesn't matter which bit that you're from, you're British, but not so here, and not so in Italy either. It's regional first, isn't it? And then they
Absolutely.
become Italian if they're watching a football match or they're,
Yes.
something else, and it's something there where the whole national thing is taking part. But initially, they don't see themselves, and I never know whether that's just because it's Abruzzo or it's the history of Italy, because it's such a modern, united country. And it's strange that they do see themselves like that, don't they, really? But I don't know whether
Well,
that's so
it's a
much
younger
Rome.
country. I mean, it's strange to say for I'm living in Rome with all the 2,000-year-old monuments
Yeah,
here, but as
yeah,
a country, it's quite young. So I
yeah,
do
yeah.
think that that makes a difference, that the regional identity developed until Italy was unified. And yes, I agree with you entirely. I mean, they see themselves very much for the region. And I think that in general, Italians do not move as much as you
No,
do in Britain and we do in
no.
the US. So it's very unusual to be from one place and your parents were also born there and your grandparents were
Yes,
born there.
never.
And oftentimes you go to, I don't know, the same elementary school that your parents went to, which is very common in Italy, particularly in the, let's say, in the bigger towns, but also in Abruzzo, as you see in the towns and everything. And yes, they do feel this real sense of identity.
Mm.
But for us in working in literature, that's great, right? Because that
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
that really.
Well, I mean, you can now draw on, because of your interest in writing. And I was going to say, where did that start? At school or diaries? I mean, people have a strange, well, not strange, but such a unique, whether it was, like I say, diaries, it's diaries, when they were a child or something. But for me, when I do interview authors, that interest in writing didn't just start a couple of weeks ago. It goes way, way back, and somewhere it's inherent in the soul somewhere.
True. No, I've always obviously been a great reader. I love reading. I always loved writing. I loved creative writing, but I did not follow up with it really from, especially after college, because I was just so busy with
Yeah.
working and with my other aspects of life. But I always enjoyed writing short stories, so I did continue a little bit doing that. And then at a certain point, especially here, I decided to find a writing group and started doing it a little bit more regularly. So it was something that I could fit into the evenings and weekends, because I'm more of an evening and weekend writer since I am working full time. But I loved it. I really enjoyed that. Then I started attending writing conferences, which there were
Okay.
some good ones in Italy actually at the time. So
Okay.
that's when I really started and learning everything about the industry. And I have to say, in those years, especially, we're talking about the last 10 years, perhaps, when I started getting interested in this as an industry, so much has changed in the publishing world, and particularly for indie authors. So yeah, I really, once I started doing it regularly and having writing groups and joining exactly the Women's Writers Fiction Association and the Historical Novel Society, then you really find, your tribe, the people that you enjoy
Yes.
talking about this, and it does help a lot. I think for authors, joining these associations is fantastic, because they have write-ins, they have sessions, they have seminars. You find your beta reader partners there. And plus you can talk about the industry, you can cheer one another on. I mean, it's very helpful.
So let's talk about then In the Shadow of the Apennines. It's a really powerful story, isn't it? It's a very powerful, emotional Times book. Where did the idea come from? Tell me, what would you have known about a shepherdess with the sheep, and how on earth where were you when you thought, yeah, do you know what, there's one of the Abruzzese dogs doing the round it. Where did it come from? Tell me.
Well, like you, Wendy, I have a tie with Abruzzo, in
Yeah.
that for people who don't know, I mean, it's quite close to Rome. So this is the region just because I know that not everyone knows Abruzzo. So it is the state, the province that's next to the province in which Rome is located. So when my older son was very young, it was very hot here in Rome. It was the hottest summer that we had had forever. I remember 2003. And I remember that a friend of the family, a friend of my Italian husband's family, lent us her house in Abruzzo. And I remember for the first time that summer, especially with a newborn, we slept well. We could really enjoy it. And I started going around. We went and traveled around and looked at a lot of the beautiful towns and the nature. And that was my discovery of Abruzzo. I think I had been through it before, but I hadn't really known it that well. And I loved it. And I love to hike. I love to ski. I enjoy mountain biking. So this was ideal for me. We decided to buy a little house there in the mountains, which is in Ovindoli, but in the story, I have changed it to Marsicano because I needed to make it a little bit more deserted than it is. It's a very busy ski resort in the wintertime. But I absolutely loved it out there. And the nice thing, as you know, with Abruzzo is being in the town, talking to the people in the town about their lives and what it was like when they were younger and the stories that they had from their grandparents. I learned a tremendous amount and really enjoyed that. And then I think I was really struck by the 2009 earthquake that you know in L'Aquila. And at that, which was really, it's only 20 kilometers from the town where we are. And, you know, that, of course, was so devastating. And of course, the region is used to it, but of that magnitude. And that's when I started discovering about Pescina and the earthquake in 1915, because, of course, that was in newspapers a lot. They were talking about it. And through that, I discovered are you familiar with Ignazio Silone, the author that I mention a lot in the book?
Yes.
Because his books are absolutely fantastic. So then I started reading about Ignazio Silone, who is from Pescina, who lived through the earthquake. And of course, what I have in there, even though this is invented, the part about his family is true. He lost all of his family members except for his brother in the earthquake. And if you read his writing about you know, about the poverty of Abruzzo, and
I've definitely got the bread. Is it the bread and the wine one of
Bread and Wine and Fontamara?
I've got that one in the bookcase.
He also wrote a fantastic one. I don't know if it is, because I've read them in Italian, so I don't know if it's translated directly, but it's Confessioni di un Cristiano, which is fascinating because it is about Pope Celestino, I guess it would be Celestine, I don't know how it's translated in English, who before Pope Benedict, Pope Ratzinger, who just died, he was the last pope to have abdicated his duties in the 1200s.
Right.
So he that was quite interesting because he was from L'Aquila. Outside of L'Aquila. And so that was a fascinating book too. But as an author, he was fascinating and reading about it. And then I started reading, obviously, newspapers of the time. And you know, it's interesting to think it's quite close to Rome, but at the time it was incredibly isolated. I mean, when you think about the highway that goes through Abruzzo now,
that's very recent.
That's in 1980s.
I was
so before
say,
the 1980s, it was cut off in some ways.
Pescara Airport, which is what we call our airport, that was a racing track sort of 30 really recently, 30 odd years ago. No motorway at all.
No, it's incredible.
Only, you know, they did something and Ryanair kind of moved in and then they built the motorway, and that has done a massive amount to open up Abruzzo to tourism. But
absolutely,
if you hadn't have seen that, you know, the sheep on the mountains and the wildness and the remoteness of it, could you ever have just imagined it all? I mean, which bit comes first when you're writing? Seeing it and thinking, yes, there's a story in that, or just something from the imagination?
Well, I think that's different for every writer, but for me, which seems odd saying it as a writer, but I'm very visual, so I need to see it. I mean, I I don't actually remember the author, but I remember reading an author interview with someone who wrote a novel based in Rome. And she said, and I haven't read the novel, so I don't know, but she said she specifically chose a city to which she's never been because
Okay.
she did not want anything about the location to distract from the story,
Oh,
which I
right.
thought was fascinating because that's the exact opposite. I'm not saying it's good
Opposite.
or bad, but
To
it's
the
the
way you're,
exact
yeah,
opposite of what I do.
I do.
I need to see it and I need to know it. And of course, I know it there. I know quite well because I spend a lot of time there. And in fact, most of the book has been written there because I'd be out for weekends and then, would write in the evenings. But yeah, I think that with Abruzzo, it is very particular and it has had a fascinating history. And I do mention that in the book a lot because, basically the double whammy of
Mm.
the earthquake and then immediately afterwards World War I, that it in World War I did not take equally as perhaps World War II did the soldiers from all of the regions because they really needed to be able to fight in the mountains, as you know, was a campaign in Italy. So it was normal that most of the soldiers who went were from the mountains to go fight in in the Alps. So yeah, it is. I mean, you see that in Abruzzo. And that was another thing that struck me. I mean, seeing all of the names, you would see these soldier statues, which in fact,
Yeah, yeah.
I
It's
have it here
heartbreaking,
on
heartbreaking. Oh,
my book because on most of the mountain points you'll
yeah.
see in Abruzzo these soldier statue. And if you look especially in Abruzzo, most places you'll see lots from many more from World War II. But if you look in the Abruzzo region or mountain regions in the north, it's the World War I that just stuns you with all of the names of the soldiers who died in the First World War. And so it was a region of older women, children, and a lot of people left at that time. So that when you look at the large migration that tended to be very heavily after
States
World
to
War
the
One.
UK, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, also to Rome, I mean,
Yes,
and to cities
yeah.
here, I mean, cities here, but also to the UK, to the US, Canada. I don't know if this happens in your town, but I always enjoy in August, in my town in Abruzzo, I'm calling it my town, but the town that I go to, they have a lot of the immigrants who come back, but at this point we're talking about fourth generation. They don't
Yeah,
really speak any
yeah.
Italian anymore, and it's fascinating. It's really nice talking to them as well.
I don't, I've never really noticed it with anyone else, or maybe it's because I live in Italy. But the Italian genes that are there in people, no, as you say, no matter how many generations ago that their ancestors left Italy and have gone spread all around the world, those Italian genes seem incredibly strong. In every which way, whether it's in the women, the passion, the strength that they have in the women, just the stoicism that they have, and it's still there. Those genes seem still there in a lot of them, and as you say, they're now coming back and rediscovering roots and things like that, which is just amazing. But
Yeah.
for you, and I was going to ask you about the research that you do. I mean, it clearly for you is an absolutely integral part of the writing. I mean, do you say to yourself, I'm going to do a couple of hours each day on research, or I'll just keep going on the internet and see what I can find? Oh, that's an interesting story. I'll bring that one in. How does that work within the writing?
Yeah, well, I do actually love the research and
Right.
because I also like history. So for me, it's so much fun to go back and I mean, also here in Rome, we're quite fortunate that we have a lot of really good places to be able to do the research. And I love just old newspapers. I mean, I'm doing a project now that's set in fascist Rome. And so during the holidays, when I had some time, I was sneaking away a few hours during the day. Of my holiday to do a few hours of research in the Italian Senate has a wonderful library, and they give you all of these old newspapers in these bound books, which are just wonderful. And you go through, and these were the old. I mean, the director of Il popolo dell'Italia was Benito Mussolini. So you can imagine, it's kind of, because you're reading through the official propaganda of things, but it's fascinating. I really enjoy that. The problem is getting it down so it's not an information.
Well, I was going to say, is there ever a point where you just think, bit more research? No, enough. I have enough material now. I have to start writing this and putting this together. I mean, I don't write books. I only write book reviews, but I'm absolutely fascinated in how unique, how individual people do this. Do you just say to yourself, that's enough, Kimberly? Come on, just get right.
There is that, but I do have to say there are a lot of things that I think are fascinating and I put aside for other projects because I realize it's a little bit too much.
Right.
I also didn't say I'm married to an historian. My husband is a history professor, so a lot of times he is doing research in archives too and comes across something that's interesting, but I'm more interested in a small character or the wife of a character or some, that someone that he is doing. So sometimes I borrow some of the research that he is doing, and then he's able to point me in the right direction for that. But yeah, I mean, the history for me is always fascinating, and as you know, in Italy, it's just never ending. There are so many things here that are fascinating to be able to explore and to do more about, but you do have to worry because I do understand the point. If you're reading historical fiction, you don't want it to get too much in the way of the story.
No, it doesn't need to be like a history book. But, this idea that you have this in the shadow of the Apennines, this girl who I felt so sorry for her in some ways, because I just felt that Samantha was just a bit of a tortured soul, really. In things that happened to her, marriage, what we don't want to give away what happens in the book, but, just deciding, which many people do, right, that's enough, my life's going nowhere. And you mentioned that Frances May's Under the Tuscan Sun, and you also say, and I think it's so ironic, that this is a version of Under the Tuscan Sun, complete different version, but essentially she's had enough, doesn't want life anymore with that man, and right, I'm going to have a new life now. But it's not so easy to have a new life sometimes, is it? As Samantha finds out. So just explore that. Tell me your thinking about, I mean, nothing awful has ever happened to you, I guess. Where did you find it inside of you to have a character like Samantha, who, can't this girl just have a break? Can't something good happen to this woman? I mean, it does, but initially, where does that come from?
Well, the genre that I write in is women's fiction, and I know not everyone loves it, but I really like it because it's about the interior journey, and I'm really generally as women as protagonists, but speaking about this and what happens to change. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a happy ever after ending, but you have to see the emotional change that goes along. That doesn't mean there's not story and everything else, but primarily we're interested in seeing that. And so yes, I write women's fiction then with different subgenres like historical fiction. This is a dual timeline, or short stories or other things. But I'm very, very interested in the emotional journey, and also bad decisions that people make when they're younger, when they're not confident in themselves, when they put their own desires and what they want to do aside for people perhaps who are stronger than they are. And so these are the things that I wanted to develop. The other thing that you probably see also living abroad, there are a lot of people who think that everything is going to change because you go someplace else. And as you know, you're still yourself, right, in the new place. So she did have a lot, the character of Samantha has a lot to overcome, and she perhaps naively thinks that, one, she wants to leave. She just wants to break with her past because she has had a very difficult time, a brutal divorce, has lost her job. And so she wants to start over again, which is admirable. But of
It
course,
is. Oh, it is.
you choose a little mountain town, you must realize that's not going to
Plenty
be
do, Kimberly.
so easy.
Plenty do. You know, and I think that's the nice thing about it, in that you find somehow when you need it an inner strength. And I think she found that, and it took her a long time to find that inner strength. And, you know, ironically, bizarrely, it was the house that she came to, you say remodel, don't you? We say renovate. The house that she wanted to renovate and change and modernize was the very house that gave up its secrets.
Exactly.
And enabled her to do that. So I mean, it's a very clever story. It's a very clever thing to do, really. I mean, the builder never saw anything. The builder just had that wardrobe, didn't he? And he was messing about with it, and you know, and trying to make it into shelves and things like that. But you know, the doors. But it's the house that had the secrets that enabled her to do what she wanted to do for years and years and years. And that was right. But she never found anything that she thought was interesting enough to write about.
Yeah, and perhaps didn't have the confidence to be able to do it.
Do it.
So I like this idea, of course, you know, living in Rome, of the layers of history. So I mean,
Yeah.
here in Rome, as you know, anytime anyone digs anywhere, you have artifacts. So we do work on the metro line, and you find amazing things. You find rooms. You have things that we didn't know about for millennia, basically, and just discover. Rome is filled with that. It's fascinating because whenever you go to a building, people should stop when they see any kind of display, you know, behind glass and with, because that's what they've discovered as they were constructing it. And so I like this idea of having layers within the building that she buys it for a new home. But I like the idea of there being the past of other people there, which you know is very much the case in Italy in general. I mean, there's so much history with all of the buildings that we have and everything. And then I also like the idea of, she's so caught up in her own life and her own problems, that and I think, yes, luck, hopefully none of us has all of the levels of problems perhaps that Samantha has, but at the same point you need a little bit of distance, right? And then when you look at it, and especially this is something that always struck me in general with Abruzzo, but in general, when you speak to you know, older people, or when I read a lot of histories of people and their lives at that period or during the Depression. I mean, there are things that we complain about that you look at and you say, oh my goodness. You know, I mean, we have it, even people who are not so well off today, you can't compare that to the lives of a shepherdess in
My
China
goodness.
at the beginning of the century. So, you know, I guess again, maybe with my interest in history, I know that certainly my kids have had some history teachers in school who say, oh, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen. You're like, yeah, I find that so many times when you're looking at what people had to face before, it gives a sense of perspective, right, for what things. And I think that this is what she gets when she looks at this.
I mean, anybody that has visited Abruzzo or knows a little bit about Abruzzo, I mean, that whole idea of, you know, looking after the sheep and, I mean, the poverty, it's so very real, so very real compared to the kind of life that we have now.
Absolutely.
But with your writing, Kimberly, what I'd like to ask you is, what matters? What does literary success mean to you? Fame, fortune, or a bit of both? Where are you with this? You know?
Well, I don't know. With fame and fortune, I might not have chosen the the correct field for that. No, I just began publishing.
Yeah.
So as you know, as you mentioned in the intro, so that was my third novel. And I have my short story collection that's coming out in May, and I'm super excited about that, even though short stories don't sell wonderfully. So this is a labor of love, because I love short stories, and it's an Italian themed stories as well. And then I'm going back to the one that I have after that is going to be a dual timeline historical. So I do like to write across those genres:
Yeah.
contemporary, dual timeline, historical, and short stories. I have, yeah, lots of ideas, lots of research, because I'm constantly writing. And so that is all going along.
You know, as you drive in, are you speaking to a recorder, or you've got a little notebook and you think, oh, I like that building. Yes, I'll use that somewhere. I'm going to do, you know.
Well, you know, Wendy, honestly, a lot of it is that the things that I want to explore anyway. So the novel that I have now with beta readers, and then I've got my editor scheduled in for it afterwards, is a palace that is very close to my home that I see every single day. And it happened to have, it was built by an American woman who married an Italian prince. And I was fascinated by the story of this palace. So there is my story. So as I said, because I'm visual, I look at it, and I thought, this has got
That's
to
an
be a
idea
book.
for a book. What about characters? Do you base your characters on people that you've met, or does that come from, you know, somewhere within?
No, I usually, because I usually start with the setting and the question, then I have my characters afterwards. But
Right.
when I went to go, have you been to Pescina yet?
No,
You
no.
really must go. That struck me so much when I went there. So when I went there and saw it, so after I mentioned to you the earthquake
Yeah,
of
I must
2009, and then
go.
went to go
I
see it,
must go.
it's fascinating, because you have the whole new town that they built after
Mm,
that earthquake. Of course, the
right.
town was destroyed, as you know, but they built the whole new town and left the old town there. In the intervening years, because we're talking about you know, over 100 years later, those buildings are still crumbling, but some people have moved in and fixed some of the buildings. So it's fascinating, because you just walk there and you're in a time warp, right? You have these ruins next to these modern buildings. And when I went there, I mean, that's when I really knew the character of Elena, because as you know, of course, I mean, they used to say that there were more sheep in Abruzzo
Yes.
than people.
Mm.
And oh my goodness, I'm going to forget I'm not sure if it was Virgil in ancient Rome who speaks about the town where I am, Ovindoli Paese de Pecore, is what he says in Latin, which is the land of sheep. So yeah, the sheep are very important in general in Abruzzo, and a lot of the wealth from the towns you can see. I think this is fascinating in Italy when they build the homes. I don't know if you've ever noticed, there can sometimes be a little, it might not be so much in your area, more where I am in the high mountains. They have a little symbol of the sheep, because they show from where they
Okay.
got their wealth, right? Where they were
Oh,
able to build
right.
these homes. Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, and that is something that Ignazio Silone also in his
Mentioned
book
it.
speaks about, because he had nightmares all of the time from the wolves. So many of the sheep after Peshin, after the earthquake, were not maintained, and the wolves came for them, and the wolves would come in closer every night. And so for him, the nightmare that kept recurring for him, he claimed in articles, was the sound of the wolves coming closer to the. So to understand all of this,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that having a shepherdess, which would have been a big, you know, women would have spent a lot of time also doing that when the men were out in the fields, that would be a good
I
character
mean, you know,
to
it
have.
still is even to this day. I mean, we're not talking anything that, well, that's what they did years ago. The transhumanza, the
Oh,
moving
sure.
sheep. I mean, that is still going on now. I mean, Abruzzo is not like any other place where it's kind of been modernized, and you know, it is how they lived then, is to really all intents and purposes is how they live still now, from the land. And you
Sure.
know, That's why I'm here, because it's so wonderful. But no, I wanted to really sort of talk about the characters that you have, and obviously, you know, were they based on people? Do your friends say, is that me in that book? Character seems a bit, you know, is Samantha based on anybody that you know, or you just felt that you needed somebody like her with her backstory to make it work together, basically, you know, somebody that wanted this new life, really.
Yeah, this is a funny question, because people often say, or sometimes people say, oh, but it sounds autobiographical, or you write this, and I think it's funny
And it's
because
not for you, is it, at all?
no, I mean, yes, I can, as we all can, empathize with everyone. Of course, you've known people who've been in similar situations or things that are, but you know, for instance, right now, my short story collection is coming out, and those are 21 different stories with 21 different characters. So I'm hoping that then it'll stop. Oh, I'm not writing autobiographically, because it's different. Although I do claim I do have one novel that I say is my only autobiographical novel.
Okay.
I have it here. This is my one that is in,
the blue
this is
waves.
Dark Blue Waves.
Yeah,
Because it's a time travel novel. So when people ask me if I write autobiographical, I say, yes, I do. This is autobiographical. I really did travel back in time. And I really.
The other thing I was going to ask you is, I mean, I love the book. I really did. It was such a, I don't know, you know, so powerful, really. How do you feel about your book reviews? How, in general? I mean, they seem to be a necessary evil. We need them. We need people to keep reading, and we need people to keep posting. We don't want anybody to say they hated it, and it's such a difficult gray area. Do you read your book reviews? Does it matter or not?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, no, I do. I read all my book reviews. I get editorial reviews, and then I also, Goodreads and Amazon. And yeah, that's part of it. I think that I'm not an expert on this. I haven't been doing this for such a long time, but one of the things that I have heard as advice, and that I think I took to heart, is develop rhinoceros thick skin.
Yeah.
I know people, I know a lot of, very successful authors who've told me, do not read reviews. I read them all the time. I mean, if I'm, of course, a lot of it, I understand people either like your book or they don't like your book, or they like the story, they don't like the story. I don't have any problems with that. It's the same thing. There have been many books that I've read, and I don't know, they've been very famous books, and they've been and I just don't like them. I tend not to leave mean reviews, but there are plenty of books that I haven't liked. I have no problem if people either like or don't like. Yes, perhaps on Goodreads some things can be mean, but I think that's part of the part of the job. And I do personally, I think it's better to just read them and get an idea of what it is, what people like, what people don't like. For instance, I think this is interesting because quite a few people who didn't like this novel, there can be people who just don't like it, but one of the things a lot of people didn't like is that it wasn't a straight dual timeline, because most dual timeline books today, you tend to do one chapter, one chapter, one chapter, one chapter. And for instance, the next dual timeline that I have is that way. But I specifically didn't want to do that because I wanted her to discover it at a low point when she needed it. Because sometimes I think we do get inspiration or things, but we're not ready to listen to it.
Right.
And so I wanted her to understand the region more. I wanted her to realize the mistakes that she had made. I wanted her to realize that, she had a lot to learn, and she needed to learn that from other people. And I like this idea of a life being touched by not just a woman in another country, but in a different century basically as well, right? And the things that we can learn from that. So I wanted it to be the final stage of it. And the thing is that people who like dual timeline, they're used to a certain structure.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do think if I had, because I like indie publishing because I like doing it the way I want to do it, but I think if I had to do it regularly, that probably would have had to have been changed. I probably would have had to do the more standard throughout. So, for instance, that's a fair criticism. That's something people who really like dual timeline, they like the dual timeline
Yeah.
all the way throughout.
Is there another
Um,
story for Samantha, do you think? Can we see her finding something else to write about, do you think?
I have not, am I didn't necessarily think about that, although I have had people who said to me, oh, I'd like to see something else with that.
Like she
I
finds
have
something
left
else now, I think her mum, that she would
or the
use
region.
them.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll certainly want to write about Abruzzo again, because it's just, there's so many stories there to tell, I think. But I didn't necessarily envision that as having a sequel, but who
No.
knows?
No. I mean, you write under your own name. How do you feel about pseudonyms? How do you, I mean, you write wrongly? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Or because you kind of put yourself out there when you're writing under
Yeah.
your own name, aren't you? And especially, I guess,
Absolutely.
with the social media advertising that you do, and this, you can't even hide behind the name. Was there any thought
Yep.
process behind that? Keep the name, or
There was a little bit because because I have a professional career and I'm writing. But honestly, now I'm thinking a little bit more about, in some years I will retire and then I'd like to write full time. So that's basically why I started off as I did. I know many people who do write under pseudonyms or write in multiple genres under different ones. I met one woman who's a successful author, and she writes in various genres, and she has under each one, she has a pen name for each, and she has separate social media presences for
that sounds
each of
like
those.
hard work.
I mean, I was fascinated listening to her, but I thought, oh my goodness,
And
no
how do you
way
find
could
time to sleep if
I'm very impressed. I was very impressed. I love to hear everything. No, for me, I'm
It was
fine with putting myself
interesting
up.
for us, and I think it's kind of set a benchmark in a way that we always had for years now, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter. And for many, many years at the beginning, nobody even knew who J.K. Rowling was. Was it a man? Was it a woman? And obviously, we know now. But now that she has turned to adult fiction, it's written under, I think it's G. Galbraith or something like that. It is a completely different name.
Yeah.
And I know,
well, with that level of success, I think she had a little bit of a different.
You can do what the heck you like. Yeah, I get.
Yeah.
But I think that what I'm finding is talking to authors, published authors, that it's great to be published. It's wonderful to publish. It's the holy grail of writing. However, it does come with a lot more limited control than the indie authors. So now it's almost like people are thinking, do you know what? I'm just going to go hybrid. I've got a publisher for my historical fiction, and I think I'll go indie for something, for the chick flick stuff. I mean, there are no rules here now anymore. Maybe there weren't before, but I think the rules were kind of set by the publishing industry, and everyone adhered to that, and we didn't really know what was going on. But now it's kind of every woman for herself, isn't it, really? How do you feel about that? Is that's good for you, isn't it, in a way, I guess?
Yeah, well, I really have to say that I love indie publishing, but I do find it fascinating to see. I had asked a successful historical fiction author to come to. I'm within a historical group of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and so I invited her as a guest once, and she came. And it was fascinating because she's with one of the big publishers, but she still does some indie publishing, and she maintains rights to foreign versions and ebooks. So there are a lot of different models in the publishing world that I don't think would have been years ago.
Yeah.
But I have to say, a lot of people ask me why I did start wanting to traditionally publish when I started this journey. And that's when I started going to writers' conferences. But I have to say that from then to now, indie publishing has also changed a lot because it was still a little bit new and I didn't really think about it that much. But then I started, there are usually sessions when you go to these writers' conferences, as I'm sure you know well. And I was not going to the one so much on indie publishing, or a little bit to learn about it. And then there came a moment when I started saying, I think this is really for me. And I started meeting people who are as you know, the author world is really wonderful. I mean, people are really generous with their advice and their time and suggestions and the mistakes they made that you should avoid. I think that's great. But indie publishers even more so, because I think there is a feeling that they want others to succeed as indies and to grow this community. And I met at one of the conferences, I met David Goffram, who's an Irishman and very big on indie publishing. And he has a wonderful site too, with lots of free resources for people who are thinking of indie publishing. And I remember I just sat down with him and we discussed it for a long time. And I kind of told him where I was coming from and what I wanted. And he just gave me some really good advice. And I started reading more about it. But I for several reasons, I really like having the control. I like being able to write what I want. For instance, when I was first talking about this, like I said, the idea of doing, readers want certain things and that's understandable. But, if you're writing in a certain standard, they want your protagonist to be a certain age. They want, there are things that could be negative or, as you've seen, my character is not Samantha, is not always likable, right? She doesn't always, and I feel sometimes a little bit the publishing industry, they don't want to necessarily, they just want to make it, you change this, you change that. I don't mean that I don't want to change anything, but I work with editors, I work with beta readers, but I like having the final say on what I want to do.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the publishers can really only go with what they think is commercially viable.
Sure.
And I know a lot of authors that have said that since they've been with a publisher, it's almost like they're branded a certain way, and the publishers branded with the book covers, branded with as you say, the names in the book, that it's branded because that's what the publishers do, and you can't knock them for that.
No, not at all. It's a risk.
They're in the business to sell the books at the end of the day. I feel the more people I talk to, the hard thing for the serious writers is, I've written the book, how on earth do I market this now? How do I just spend all day on TikTok now? I mean, what's the way forward? And I think that seems to me, there seems to be a gap now in, how do I sell this to people? How do I get it out there? I mean, you're doing extremely well. I mean, you've done your book blog tour with one I've not heard of before, Goddess Fish. I guess that's an American one. I don't know that one. And people are being ever inventive about how they can market it. I've seen, books made into earrings. I've seen books made into little cupcakes. There's just no boundaries anymore.
No, true.
How are you going to market this book? How do you find your marketing? A struggle or a delight?
Well, the thing is that I love the idea of being able to give the book to someone and they would do all the marketing for you. But unless you're J.K. Rowling, from what I understand from many author friends who, are traditionally published, it seems that even for them, they're doing so much more. I mean, and I think this was also a point for me when I realized it, that, again, unless you're really Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, then I'm sure they don't have to do that much if they don't want to. But most authors today, even very successful authors, have to do a lot of their own marketing. So actually, the MBA that I got at Bocconi in Italy, my within there I have a focus in strategy and marketing. I actually like marketing, so which is a plus.
That's lovely.
that does help. So I started realizing that and went, well, okay, if I'm going to be traditionally published and I'm still going to do most of my own marketing, but I might have to give up the cover I want. I might have to change the story in ways I don't want to do. They might not really want me to do short stories and then a contemporary. And I said, well, in the end, I can do it myself and market it myself, which I'm not saying that that's the best, but I'm saying I personally am happy with that.
The advice I'm giving to people is just get your author platform sorted, get your website. I mean, you've got to, in the crowded market, you've got to engage somehow with your readers. We're doing that on the, we do workshops on that on the creative writing retreat. You've got to engage somehow, with readers and make yourself accessible. I don't think you can really just kind of hide behind the books anymore, because readers want to know about you. Well, where does she live? What does she do? How many kids has she got? We're in that kind of a world, aren't we? Where, can you really do anything secretive anymore? No, probably not if you're a writer, because everybody's going to know. But I mean, I always think that, maybe if Emily Bronte had come to Abruzzo and written Wuthering, it would have been the perfect setting for Wuthering Heights, really.
Sure.
So
instead of the moors.
So just to finish off, one thing I was going to ask you was something that you said that made me smile. Having an Italian husband, you are very familiar with Italian hand gestures. So I was going to give you a test. I was going to give you a test.
And well, it's not just my husband, it's my kids. I think that's probably where I learned most of it.
Okay, so if you had a really good meal and the meal was absolutely amazing, give me the hand gesture. What would you do?
Can I do the one for children? Because there's a different one for children, which is adorable. There are symbols for children. Children do this.
Yes.
And it's adorable because my kids went to the asilo nido. They went to the, the very early childhood where the food is the most important thing. Yep. And they every day they have seasonal food and it's brought from the market and they learn that from their early age. And there were children who were Japanese, Chinese, they were living in Italy and they all found it so cute that the kids always did this.
Yes. I know. We wonder what on earth people were doing when we first came here, but now we know. And what about if you just wanted to say, what the heck, goodbye, what the heck? What did you do? You're passing your test here, Kimberly. You're a seasoned Italian, aren't you, if you know the hand gestures? I've lost your voice. Kimberly, I've lost you. I've lost your microphone.
No, because I hit this as I was doing my hand. Apologizing for my hand. If you want to be a little bit more, not vulgar, but it's a little bit, you wouldn't do this to someone you don't know. It would be this, right?
Yes.
So this is probably a little safer. And my kids, when they didn't want to do something, this is what they would do to me. But what are you saying?
I mean, one of my students, she never really wanted to study English, and her mother was Francesca, die.
And this is the other one.
And I thought, she's telling her to die. What a dreadful mother she is. It was only later I learned that she was saying, come on, do it. But anyway.
Well, so the funny thing is that also in America, perhaps in England too, like a lot of politicians are very wooden, right? And they just stand there. And I happened to work for a politician who he had to learn that for his communication skills to do this. And I thought, oh my goodness, they would never offer that class in Italy.
No. English politicians, I don't think there are many hand gestures. I mean, the thing is with us, what's inherent in our genes for British people, we know how to queue. We queue for everything, and that's just something that's just built in. We don't. No one says, you know, we're not shown how to do it. It's just something that we do. We queue for a bus. We queue for, you know, a ticket office. We just do that. So that's, I suppose, what we do. But my last question is your favorite childhood book, please.
Oh my goodness, it's so hard just to
Sure.
choose
Yeah.
one. And the thing is that so many of them I got to reread with I forgot about how nice that is when you reread with your children. You know,
Yes.
when you get
Yes.
to pick books and
I mean,
then
I mean,
reread them
now
as an
I want to
adult.
revisit all the ones that I did at school. I want to go back, and why doesn't somebody make a film of, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird? Why don't we see this again? I would just, you know, all the Mark Twain stuff, all the, you know, all the books that were there for me, obviously the classics as well. But can you pick one out that you think is just, for you, it's just up there as a book that you could go, your go-to book on a desert island? You're struggling, aren't you, Kimberly?
Well, no, it's so, I mean, I have so many books that are my favorite. Once again, can you hear me?
Yes.
Uh-oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I was sorry, is this going out? Well, the ones that perhaps when I was a young child that I really liked are all of the series of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie, because I
Okay.
found those fascinating. And it's a
Right.
whole series of books. Maybe Little House on the Prairie is the most famous, but it just
Yeah.
follows it. And as a kid, which probably makes sense that eventually I would write historical fiction, I just found it fascinating. I mean, this life and what it would have been like on, you know, living on the prairie, and how they had to have enough food to survive, and how they had to do everything. They built the house themselves, they built the furniture themselves. And yeah, I think that that was something that that I, maybe as a kid, as a really young kid, and I reread that with my children
Okay.
when they were very young, and we just had so much fun doing that. And then they wanted to see the places.
Oh, right. It's when you think back to the books that you read that you didn't know it at the time, that had quite a lot of impact on you, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
I mean, you
I'm
know,
sure.
I progressed through, you know, all the American stuff, yes, and the English stuff, you know, the Brontes and
Oh, I
Jane
love English
Austen,
literature.
oh, George Eliot, and, you know, and you just go on.
Exactly.
How lovely to have, you know, been born in those times, really, or how restrictive to have been
Sure.
born in those times as well. But, well, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. It really
For
has.
me as
Um,
well, I'm so pleased to be able to meet you
Yeah,
virtually.
absolutely. It's so nice. I have put a post on one or two of our local forums, Life in Abruzzo, because people that are here as well, are living here, are really interested in books that, oh, there's a place. And I know when I first put it on there, someone said, Marsicano, where's Marsicano? Don't know that one. Where's that one? You know, and people are very interested. So there's a whole new market here, as well as a whole new market out there
Absolutely.
for something like this. So, you know, I just try and spread the word. I really do.
Oh, thank
You
you.
know,
Well, I
like
do
my
hope to
social
translate it
media.
into Italian, because I would like to. This is one that I think yeah, has some interest also in the Italian market,
What
as
about an
some of my
audio
Italian friends
book,
are.
Kimberly? Could you do an
Yep,
audio book?
I
Yeah,
am planning on
maybe.
it. I am planning on doing an audiobook, so I will be. Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, and I really, really, really hope that maybe we can get together in September when we
That
have
would be
the next
great.
writing retreat. Laura Morelli is going to
Who
be
is
doing.
fantastic and another wonderful
No,
Italophile. I love Laura.
she's going to
Keep
be.
calling her Laura. She knows. Laura.
Well, I don't know whether I should say Laura or Laura. Really, I think I'll
She
have to.
doesn't mind because I see the name. I've met her at the Historical Novel
Okay, right.
Society and others, and it's just funny when I see the name written, I just pronounce it Laura because it's an
Laura,
Italian name, Laura
absolutely,
Morelli, and
absolutely.
so I'm used to it. But she's used to both.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a relief. I don't want to
She's
miss
fantastic, though. She's really,
so she's going to
really
do a
good
Q&A
speaker.
session for us at the next writing retreat. So it's just going to be wonderful. But do you know what? Just to help people get to that point, like you in the industry, you know, give a helping hand, and that's
Absolutely.
lovely. But wishing you absolutely well with all the books, and maybe when
Thank you,
you're
Wendy.
ready, come and do a book signing, please, when you're next in a book show. And
Absolutely. Well,
you
I
know,
love your region, so I
so
do
do I.
happily come out to
So,
Ovindoli often
yeah.
and then travel from there. So
Yeah,
that
you
would
know,
be
let's
great.
arrange a book signing and a book reading, because you know, that's the way I want to go with it. I just want to, you know, these are books, these are fascinating books, and let's hear more about them and the author.
Yeah, and it's so much fun getting authors and readers together and just being able to have a nice conversation. And as you know well from the region, you know, with a glass of wine and talking about books is idyllic. I do unfortunately have tea, but usually there I either have uh,
Well,
a good glass of Abruzzo wine.
it's been a blast. I don't know how you say that in the States. In English, we just say it's been a blast. I don't know what you'd say, but you know, let's, you know, stay in touch and let me know. And you've got the next
Absolutely.
one coming out, haven't you? When's the launch?
In May.
Oh, in May, right?
So
Okay,
that will be in May. Yeah. So
right.
I'm
Okay.
finalizing the cover and everything
Oh,
with my
wow.
graphic artist
Oh,
now. And it's
okay, that's
very much
wonderful.
Italian based. So it's hopefully a bit of virtual tourism too, because it's about foreign women in
Yeah,
Italy and
yeah,
Italian women also
yeah.
abroad.
I
So
really like the
yeah,
sound of that one. I really do. So
I'll
yeah.
make sure you have a copy.
Yeah, so keep us up to date with that. Well, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wendy.
And
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'll let you, we're going to have our supper now. I think we've got pork steaks with marsala, I hope.
Mm.
And so I'll let you get on with your
I'm
supper.
going to get cooking.
Oh, yeah, okay. Have a lovely evening.
You as well.
Buona serata.
Buona serata anche a
Buona
te
serata.
e buona
Okay.
cena.
Buona cena. Ciao,
A
Kimberly.
presto, Wendy, grazie.
Bye.
Bye.